Hello, and welcome to Green Dragon, a monthly show brought to you by Howard Community College, where we talk about green initiatives in the state and county and ongoing sustainability efforts at HCC. Also, ideas and ways for you to be more sustainable at home. I'm Bob Marietta, HCC's Environmental Health and Safety Supervisor, and I thank you for being with me today. My guest today is Bill Mahoney from the Howard County Office of Community Sustainability, where he works on outreach and implementation projects.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Oh, glad to. Bill, I've had several members of your office on my show, and each has had their own take on what the Sustainability Office means for Howard County. What's it really for, from your perspective?
Yeah, it seems a little nebulous on the surface, right, Bob? Sustainability is a really broad term to begin with, right? I think most of us would agree that the definition circles around something like balancing our economic, environmental, and social interests for such an outcome that future generations have an equal shot to what we have for the quality of life that we enjoy today. So how does that affect the way that an office works with, throughout the government, with other agencies, with the public, et cetera? It means that we get involved in a whole lot of different things. We get involved in agricultural initiatives, we get involved in stormwater and tree planting and energy conservation and energy production. And so what it means is, how it plays out through our offices, there kind of needs to be at least an office that is nimble enough and works in enough different fields that we can cross sectors and bring creative, productive ideas together that, might be difficult through certain traditional methodologies of getting things done in the county. So in some ways, we're kind of like a specialized task force.
Yeah, I can see that. And So, Bill, each of us has worked with many conservation-minded local nonprofits, but one stands out for its mission of working with young adults to develop conservation skills while performing much-needed conservation projects in the county. What makes what they do important enough to be part of your regular job?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I'm glad you want to recognize the work of Howard EcoWorks, right? So they are as you said, a conservation corps model of young people from Howard County who are learning how to do green jobs. So for the most part, what that means for them is they're pretty stormwater and sort of classically environmentally focused. So tree plantings, rain gardens, invasive species management, among some other things. They also work on some pretty serious, critical, truly critical actions, like they clear debris out of flood-prone waterways in both Ellicott City and in Columbia. Before a storm comes through, for example, you're going to want to have all your culverts, all of the water conveyances cleared of large logs or debris that people may have thrown in the streams and accumulate at these choke points. They're working on things like keeping those waterways clean to avoid flooding. They work also at our detention center to get people who have, maybe made some mistakes in their lives a second chance with some green job skill training to get back into the workforce, become productive members of our society. So EcoWorks they're all over the place in a great way, doing work in all areas of the county. And in that way, they really serve as a very productive extension of a lot of the work that we try to accomplish ourselves. But them being a nonprofit and them having different sets of skills and access to different tools, it allows them to do some things that are trickier for us to do. So nurturing that relationship, keeping EcoWorks in the county working together cooperatively on private land, on public land, just has always been critical, but I think we'll find even more interesting uses for them as challenges arise moving forward.
Yeah, and I think it's great that the the young people actually get paid to do this work. So I think, and
That's right.
And I
I mean,
understand you're going to be
it's good
starting.
work.
Yeah, yeah, and you're going to be hiring again more people soon, right?
They will be. I mean, I would consider them to always be hiring. If they are not currently, if you're able to find some other short-term work and wait another 3 to 6 months, they almost always have a new grant coming along or something that they will need more people for. So, keep track of them. If you think you missed an opportunity to apply, keep checking in.
Yeah, I know a lot of our students have worked with them, so it's been great for them too. Bill, each of us
Absolutely.
has worked with a lot of local groups. And I was wondering if you could recommend any of the other local groups that you've worked with, and also how people can find out about them.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of the way that I work with the local groups is more professionally, honestly. But for your everyday folks too, you can get involved with the Patapsco Heritage Greenway. You could get involved with the Howard County Conservancy. They both have plenty of volunteer efforts available, from tree planting to the Conservancy probably needs help doing something like cleaning out bluebird boxes, I just imagine. There are other groups as well that I'm a little bit less familiar with, although there's of course the Community Ecology Institute as well. They've got a interesting couple of programs. I know of some local agriculture and I think an apothecary farm in the making. So there's groups out there. Don't think that there aren't opportunities to get involved. Yeah, I would say they each also cover kind of different geographic areas. So you can find something that's like pretty meaningful for you and in your own neighborhood. But I've done some manner of work with all of these groups, and they're all very, I would say, reliable, responsible. They do the work right, so it's effort well spent.
Yeah, and folks can get in touch with them by looking at your office's website, the Live Green Howard County.
That's true. I'd say almost everything we talk about today is in some way available through that website. It really is a great clearinghouse. Shout out to Alyssa Reineck for managing that website. It's got tons of information on almost everyone we work with. So if you're looking for ways to get involved, there's inspiration to be had on that site.
Now, our county executive, Calvin Ball, has recently released a report on the county's climate action plan. Now, I know your office developed that plan and is working to implement it, but what should everybody living here know about the plan, and how can they get involved in making it happen?
That's right. So, yeah, we have this really broad climate action plan called Climate Forward, and it's broken down generally into mitigation strategies and resiliency strategies. And that's not something that people need to get too hung up on, but what that basically means is our mitigation strategies are where we want to cut carbon emissions and we want to, burn cleaner moving forward, and basically look at also sequestering carbon as well. It's kind of our carbon budgeting side of things. And then on the other hand, in resiliency, we have things that are more like tree planting and stormwater initiatives, et cetera. Whereas, back in mitigation, you have things that are more like transportation initiatives, waste management, things that you can imagine pretty large carbon footprints. Of course, there's a lot of overlap here, right? Trees sequester carbon, so that plays into a mitigation side of things. But for organization's sake, we've broken it up so it's a little more digestible. And a lot of the nature side of things falls under one of the work groups called the Ecosystem Services Work Group, which I'm leading. And we're looking at things like tree canopy, wetland protections, forest protection, work we could do in the Green Infrastructure Network, et cetera. And so when we think of a lot of the ecosystem services provided by healthy streams, streams that are connected to their floodplains, forests, the value of a forest for stormwater, the many layers, you have tiers of trees and then shrubs and middle story trees between that and an herbal layer, that value is considerably higher from a resiliency perspective for us locally than it is from a carbon sequestration when you look at our overall carbon accounting here. So it's just something to keep in mind that, we have different ways of looking at this plan, but many of the actions we do are meant to address multiple actions within the plan. So in any case, the people I work with in the Department of Public Works and Planning and Zoning and Recreation and Parks, we're all looking for ways to improve things that we're already doing a great job on, like afforestation, reforestation, protecting our wetlands, etc. And mostly in the last year, that's meant finding a lot of plantable area for trees. We're going to be putting in something around 82 acres of trees come next spring, which is fairly monumental for us. But what, citizens can do to get involved with the plan, I would say is, get familiar with the plan and think about the ways that the groups that you mingle with, groups that you're involved with professionally, socially, etc., what can you all do together? Are there better waste habits that you could exhibit as a group? Is there education you could be helping with? Could you just be labor to help with planting trees at some point? We know what a lot of the right answers are, and we have to kind of just begin taking action on them. So not a lot of need to recreate the wheel or anything like that. Get involved, get with the groups that we've talked about, or the county itself, and there's a place for you to get involved. If you like planting trees, if you like teaching, whatever the case may be.
Now, you used one term there that I'm sure a lot of people are not familiar with. That was ecosystem services. What all does that mean?
Yes, fair enough. I might have glazed over that. Right. So if you think of a tree that is over some pavement, when the water hits the tree and then trickles down slowly and hits the pavement, that water is going to move slower than if it had just hit the pavement initially. So that very slowing of the water that will keep our streams more intact by slowing erosive forces is an ecosystem service. It's anything that nature does for us for free that we could assign some kind of value to, whether it's a quality of life thing or an actual financial value. Services like pollination for a big farmer are somewhat more quantifiable. Something like looking out your window and seeing trees and having that, help your heart rate go down is something that, also may be quantifiable, but is more so felt, is more so a quality of life thing. So, things like pollination, erosion control, cooling, aesthetic value, wind breaks, all manner of things like this, food, really, fisheries, et cetera. All of these things are ecosystem services that we derive from healthy ecosystems. And we derive them better from healthy ecosystems than we do, per se, just a tree. So, right, that tree that is doing a little bit of work on the edge of a parking lot is very important. It's cooling that parking lot, it's intercepting some water, but a forest is going to intercept, even on a foot by foot basis, more water. It's going to have a higher pollination value, et cetera, things like that.
What challenges do you see that are interfering with these services that we expect nature to provide for them? What challenges are we having now in our environment?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things is that ecosystems are insanely complex. And, in the realm of human history, it's not that long that we've even understood, cells or the interaction between, microorganisms in the soil. And those are worlds that still contain quite a bit of mystery. So there have been instances all around the world, of course, where people lose ecosystem services that came along with species as we lose species. So just knowing what we have and being able to value it appropriately is a major struggle. There's something we call shifting baseline syndrome. So if you grow up today in Howard County, you may see less of certain species than I saw growing up. And I may have seen less of certain species that people who were here before I was born saw when they were growing up. And if you don't know that that used to be here, then how would you ever value it, right? So in an area that has pretty high, competition for land uses, it really takes proving to people that the land has like massive financial value that you can't necessarily see just by looking at it. Value that we recoup from the protection of our towns by having, floodplains that can absorb a lot of wetland or absorb a lot of water, and wetlands that can absorb a lot of water. I would say understanding. I think environmental literacy is probably our biggest challenge that we face. Politicians and, government actors generally respond to the demands of the public. So a public that is hyper aware of these values and demands that they be respected from, those running the government, they'll see more. We'll see more action. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face.
That's wise. Where can people go, would you suggest, to learn more about these environmental literacy? That's got to be a new term for a lot of folks.
I know, right? It surely is. There's a lot of places that you can go. It depends, of course, what it is that you want to learn about, right? It's a term that it covers such a vast amount of material. It's environmental literacy is understanding the physical world. So firstly, nobody's perfectly environmentally literate, right? No one's got a perfect grasp of physics or chemistry or anything for that matter, much less all of the little gears that make the world happen. So, I would say just find what you're interested in, a place that you want to apply your energy. And, frankly, between Google, AI, and word of mouth, if you want to educate yourself on something these days, it'd be pretty hard to come up short with materials to help yourself do that. Specific recommendations off the top of my head, I guess I would just say that a lot of our local and state and federal government offices have pretty amazing jumping off points to connect you to materials you might be interested in. And if we're able to include any of this, like some links or something in the text below the podcast when this goes out, I could share some things in there.
Okay, that'd be great. Now, Bill, I know you grew up exploring the woods and waters here in Howard County, and what have you seen change? What has your baseline, been influenced by? Not only in the environment, but also in the awareness of the people living here.
Sure. Yeah. Of course, we're seeing a bit more habitat fragmentation over the years. There's been quite a bit of development. There's a lot of demand for development. At the same time, we're seeing much better development than we were 30 years ago. Stormwater is, it's a thing for starters, right? There was no consideration for stormwater more or less until 1985. Year I was born. So we have seen improvements in a number of things. I would say the biggest, I think, negative I see is the proliferation of invasive species in a way that is making the regeneration of our forests pretty difficult. And when you couple that with the overpopulation of deer, which really thrive in our suburban, right up against state parks and big parks like MPEA and other amazing parks we have in Howard County, that interface, that suburban park interface is just heaven for deer and really contributing to the overpopulation. So that, basically an ecosystem that is out of balance is really a struggle. We've got pretty high levels of Lyme disease here. Now, how much of this was already occurring when I was a kid is hard to say. But it seems to me that there have been positive and negative developments, since I was young. I see a lot more tree planting going on, I suspect, than I probably did when I was younger. The streams I think are in somewhat steady shape, frankly. I think from when I was a kid, I can still catch minnows in most of the same streams that I did as a kid. That's a small sample size, but in any case, yeah, there's changes, but we've got a lot of good programs in the county, and a lot of preserved lands, and just a lot of tools in our kit to make sure that we're maintaining a pretty strong quality of life, particularly as it relates to the natural environment around here.
That sounds good. Okay. But what has your career path been to get where you are today? What would you suggest for students today who want to chart a sustainability career like yours?
Yeah, I think it depends an awful lot on if you want to be a hyper-focused person and work on something like energy efficiency or energy management, or if you would like to be more of a generalist. I am definitely more of a generalist, work on a lot of different types of projects. If that's the route that someone wanted to go, my experience was to take actually a Bachelor of Arts at the time. It's since been made a Bachelor of Science, but I went to Salisbury University and got a degree in environmental studies. That was a interdisciplinary program. So we studied environmental history, sociology, economics, sociology, economics, sociology, just the environment through a lot of different lenses. And I got a biology minor to help kind of, fortify my chops for, moving forward in a science-based world. After that, I did some seasonal work, which was the funnest time of my life, working in Arizona for AmeriCorps, working on the Eastern Shore in the Chesapeake Conservation Corps. And those jobs also demonstrate, I think, to a lot of future employers, a commitment to your field. You're not doing that kind of work for the money. You're doing it for the opportunities and to make a difference. And so I think that's something employers like seeing moving forward. Then I went to the nonprofit world for a little bit, did environmental education, which I hated, but it was a foot in the door for me. And then I got to work on more like living shoreline projects, like where you remove a bulkhead, a seawall, some people might be more familiar with, and create a soft slope that still helps protect erosion from taking out nearby homes, but is better habitat quality. So just by getting into a job to do a certain kind of work that I thought, I'll give it a shot, which was education work, I was able to start working on things that I was much more interested in and slowly transition. And then I got the job with Howard County. So, these are great jobs at Howard County. Keep an eye on their availability and, probably get a couple of years of work in ahead of time somewhere else to build up your skills and your contacts, et cetera. But the biggest thing you can do is just have a skill or two that you are pretty reliable on and that you can kind of take to the bank in an interview. But then if you want to be a bit of a generalist, that's not any kind of major drawback. At the same time, if you are really into a specific field, diving in headlong to something can be really, really rewarding as well, from, just friends that I've seen who have kind of taken a more direct, like wildlife biology approach or something like that.
Now, Bill, I know here at the college, we always talk about the value of lifelong learning, and you're sort of our poster child. I know you're working on an advanced degree now and getting into the graphical information world. And I know some of this grew out of your work with the green networking, okay, and the green infrastructure. But what have you been learning lately as you go into this new world?
Right. So I'd say the biggest lesson that I've learned in going back to school is that everyone who told me I should do it right after undergrad was completely correct. It's been pretty difficult to reestablish good studently habits, but I'm getting there. Practically speaking, or rather, I guess specifically speaking, I've gone into the Geographic Information Sciences program at the University of Maryland. So for folks who are familiar with ArcGIS, or more in our common lives, Google Maps, or the mapping program when you're looking at Zillow, or if you go to reserve a campsite where you're camping somewhere and you can see the tents that are available and which aren't. These are all examples of geographic information systems. So you can imagine there's immense practicality, not just in the environment, but really in virtually every industry. So, for example, recently I've been learning about network analysis, which, for example, can be you have materials here and they need to get to here, but there's a roadblock here. So what is the fastest route? And that can be relevant to also wildlife, for example. What is the easiest way for this wildlife to get from this area of the county to this area of the county? And what is the cost based off the difficulties they'll encounter along the way there? So yes, working with various mapped layers, including the Green Infrastructure Network and land cover and land use maps from the Chesapeake Bay program, did get me very interested in the power of computing strategies, essentially, or computing information that can lead to better strategy in implementing our environmental projects. There's, again, as far as things you might want to learn about, there is plenty of free software and free information about geographic information systems out there. All of my advisors in undergrad recommended that I take a more serious look at it. And of course, I took about 15 years to realize that they were absolutely right. So better late than never, I guess. But it is an extremely powerful tool. And again, I would put some links if there's space for it, in the information of the podcast. People could check out some examples of these tools.
Yeah. As you explain it, Bill, what comes to my mind is all your work with increasing the tree canopy throughout the county and how the different areas interconnect.
Yeah, that's right. So we have been trying, as part of the climate action plan, to get to 50% tree canopy by 2030. And while our recreation and parks does an amazing amount of work, both maintaining our existing resources and planting new trees and forests every year, we got a lot of acreage to find to get planted. And it's going to be a whole of community effort to be able to reach 50% by 2030. So we're looking for private partnerships. And we have access to grant dollars that make that possible in the rural west portion of the county and in the eastern portion of the county. So we are really encouraging people to reach out to us and Recreation and Parks if they think that they have, I would say, ideally room for 10 or more trees. There might be instances where we'd be willing to work on a smaller number. But we do like to say that we have a program for anybody, no matter how many trees you might want, including our tree giveaway programs, for example, where a person could get just one or two. So yeah, part of this mapping exercise is to find out, well, where exactly could we pick up 640 acres? Where could we apply all these programs for people who live in townhouses, people who live on farms, people who live in suburban areas, people in Columbia? Where are the locations where we can mobilize the public to work with us to really tree up the county, improve those ecosystem services, sequester more carbon, and really do our part overall as a government and as a community to, sequester more carbon, cool down our streets, cool down our parking lots, make this, sustain the livability of this great county that we live in.
That sounds great. So, Bill, who do you read or listen to these days to keep up with the rapid changes in our political and social and environmental atmosphere that we're living in? Any particular podcast? That's my selfless plug there.
Yeah, no, really just this one, Bob. I get all of the information I need from this. No, truthfully, Bob, I listen mostly to comedy podcasts as a diversion. I check in with the news 2 to 3 times a week, more if something really big is going on, but I find it's mostly recycled stuff that doesn't keep me too excited about the work that I do or about whatever, just certain things in the current state of our union. So I'm only checking in a little bit anyway, and I just think it's important to take a look at both sides at least a little bit. Even my preferred news sources are somewhat offensive to me sometimes. So you got to really look around and use your own knowledge to make your best judgment of what's going on out there.
Yeah, it's true in so many things. Well, we have reached the end of our time for our show. Thank you, Bill, for joining me today.
Thanks a lot, Bob. I really appreciate you having me.
I'll be back next month with another guest and another sustainable topic. In the meantime, if you have ideas or comments, connect with me at rmarietta@howardcc.edu. You can listen to other Green Dragon episodes wherever you find your podcasts. You can also watch us on Howard Community College's YouTube channel. Don't forget to share, like, comment, and let others know to join us and help us take care of our world. Because every small step each of us can take can have a great impact when we all work together. Thank you.